back. During Pittsburgh week, and especially Pittsburgh week, when the Ravens have a little piece of first place right now, and we'll see how they do at the Confluence on Sunday night. I got a guy here who's always ready for Permanis and that, with Yins and that in Pittsburgh. Feels like, I don't know, about 6 or 7 weeks since we've been to Pittsburgh, right, Luke?
Yeah, it's been a minute, but certainly no strangers to going up there for Sunday Night Football. The Ravens have been there how many times? I mean, I'm thinking back 2011, 2012,
it's a fixture, literally, right? It feels like a dozen times we've played. It feels like we've never played a 1 o'clock game there somehow, right?
I think I've been to Pittsburgh probably 5 or 6 times for Ravens Steelers at this point, if not a couple more times than that. And I think all but one has been a primetime game. I think 2013 they played, I believe, a 1 o'clock game there. And neither team was all that good that year, if you recall. But
I feel like I remember a 4 o'clock game. I feel like I'm always watching football in the press room there of other games before the game starts. So, I don't feel like I've ever had breakfast in Pittsburgh, strangely enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I know we've talked about the press dining being pretty good at Heinz Field, begrudgingly admitting that.
Thank you, Mr. Rooney. Thank you, Mr. Rooney.
But, I'd be curious to know what they even serve for breakfast. But certainly a big opportunity for the Ravens coming off of a big win on Sunday. And, I mean, as I said to you in our previous conversation when we were talking about the Broncos, I think they're a little bit of a paper tiger in the sense that they were 2-0, but I don't think too many people were sold on them being great in this league that we have no idea what's going on. We'll continue to remind people of that.
Hey, we beat the Buffalo Bills. Remember that.
Yeah, the Buffalo Bills who completely stomped the Minnesota Vikings. But I think this was an important win from a standpoint of knowing what's ahead. 4 of their next 5 on the road, 4 of those games coming against playoff teams a year ago, and just knowing how this team generally has struggled big time on the road. I think you look at what happened on Sunday without C.J. Mosley, without Jimmy Smith, without Michael Pierce, Willie Henry we know hasn't yet played this year. Those are 4, 2 of your best defensive players and 2 other important defensive players against a team that likes to run the football. And that was really setting up to trying to set up to be a game that was going to be difficult or be a game where you stub your toe. I mean, I think you look back to circumstances of the last couple of years. Look at that Chicago game last year. The Bengals game, of course, in Week 17. I don't need to go over that one, but go back to the year before that. I remember them in against Washington in, Week 5, Week 6, something like that. A team that was inferior to them coming into Baltimore and beating them. So as much as we've talked about the road issues, the Ravens have stubbed their toe a few more times than you'd like at home even over the last few years. And I thought Denver, while I wasn't sold on them being this dominant 2-0 football team, they certainly have enough talent that they are capable of beating you. And when you look at how it started out, you're saying, okay, here we go again. Is this Chicago all over again? Is this the Bengals all over again? But the Ravens really flipped that script, and from the time that they fell behind 14-7, they played really, really good football and played especially well. Considering how bad it looked early on, I think you have to be pleased with the way the defense was able to settle in. The offense played really well, and we've talked about that, but the defense, considering how shorthanded they were with some of their key players for a matchup like this, I think you have to be really pleased.
Well, let's go back to Denver here, and let's play some defense. And first things first, and I brought this up with Flacco at the podium after the game. Incredibly bad start, right? And I don't know that you could have a worse start than that. But the defense clamped down, obviously put on a short field by Flacco on the first drive, if you want to call it that, one play. Then the 35-yard scamper. And then after that, it was like Ray Lewis came and just did the shutdown thing, They played stout defense after that. I think the defense is going to be the hallmark for this thing. We can talk about Flacco throwing the ball around, and anything we get out of there is a nicey. And on a day when special teams was not special for the Ravens in the rain on Sunday, the defense shined again. And, we're not going to compare this thing to any of the great defenses. But I think week after week, once they get Smith back, and getting Mosley back will be part of this. And you pointed out there will be other injuries, there will be other nicks. But when you start to see this kid Young come in and run around and play like maybe 20 years ago Ozzy's 3rd and 4th and 5th round draft picks did, right? Like where they got on the field early, they played. I had Kim Herring on earlier this week. Another example of a guy that got on the field, played. We've had, too many Elams and Perrymans and Kindles and guys that never, John Simon, guys that don't get on the field for us. But defensively right now with this rotation and all these guys, and I don't think Zadarius Smith or Tim Williams or any of these pass rushers are going to beat Terrell Suggs, but on any given play, they can get to the quarterback. And I feel like there's been a credible pass rush. There's been a real commitment to drafting these guys and getting them in there. And Zadarius Smith's been here for a little while, obviously. Matt Judon taking on more of a role, and I know he got dinged up in Sunday's game. But just in general, getting after the quarterback, having depth in the secondary, that even when you lose your 3-time Pro Bowl linebacker, you can plug, play, and still play good, sound defensive football. And I think that, Wink's done a nice job a couple of weeks into this. I think the defense is going to be one of those things that all year long, we're not going to see that Jacksonville game from last year out of this defense.
Well, that remains to be seen, and certainly they need to be able to do it against some standout quarterbacks. And Case Keenum had a really kind of magical year for himself with the Vikings last year, but this is a career backup up until that point. Now, how he plays in Denver, we'll see. And certainly the results haven't been all that good when you just look at it from a statistical standpoint. But your point as far as the depth that they've built, and the one thing you mentioned, Kenny Young, the Ravens haven't really had issues with back half of the draft players getting on the field. I mean, you mentioned Judon, you mentioned Kenny Young. Go down the list. They've found plenty of guys that have been day 3 contributors. Their issues have been more so on day 1 and day 2 with some of their picks just not panning out the way that they hope. But this defense needs to be a strength. There's no doubt about it. As much as everyone should be encouraged by what Joe Flacco and the offense has done for the most part, the calling card is still going to be this defense as far as how far this team can go. They haven't, we've talked a lot about the quarterbacks that they faced last year and guys that they beat, guys they didn't beat, and much of that narrative is still yet to be written because they have to go on the road and face some really good quarterbacks this year, and they haven't proven that they can do that. But I think based on where they are in the schedule right now, knowing what they did week 1 against a quarterback who's not a starting caliber, not an NFL caliber quarterback, quite frankly, based on what I've seen. But Case Keenum was a step up in that regard, and you hope that what you're seeing from some of these younger guys, and Kenny Young kind of headlines the list of the young defensive players, but Zadarius Smith in a contract year. I mean, he's not really all that young anymore, but he's kind of given them a little extra as far as an inside pass rush, as far as a rotational guy. I mean, he's been able to get pressure on the quarterback. We've seen Tim Williams flash at least, and certainly you go down the list as far as some of the other younger players that they have on this defense. I think it's clearly a deeper defense. I think we can debate where the Ravens' top flight defensive talent ranks. If you want to take Eric Weddle, C.J. Mosley when he's healthy, Terrell Suggs, and Jimmy Smith / Marlon Humphrey. One of those two. With Jimmy Smith not being able to stay on the field, you can kind of debate where that top tier defensive talent ranks compared to other teams' top tier defensive talent. But in terms of depth, in terms of how deep the Ravens go with, upwards of 18, 19 players, 20 players getting on the field defensively, and for more than just a snap or two, I don't know how many other teams can claim that. I don't know how many other teams can feel comfortable playing that many. Now, on Sunday, I'm guessing the Ravens in a perfect world would not have to have Zach Sealer active, for example, or Darius Williams or Robertson Daniel active in the secondary. So they've certainly taken their hits with their depth, but I think it just speaks to the depth that they have collected. It has to prove itself. It's one thing to say you have a lot of inventory. You have to have that depth, meaning it's quality, and there's some guys that are still unproven, but I think going into the season, what we've seen 2 of the 3 weeks, and even if you want to just give them credit for really the second half for the most part in Cincinnati. I think the defense, considering they've missed some guys, and Jimmy Smith headlining that list of absentees, I think you have to be encouraged by what you've seen from the defense. But they've played well at home in the past, so it's not as though this is some kind of breakthrough we're seeing. They have to be able to travel. They have to play better than they did against Cincinnati, and starting next week at Pittsburgh, facing, regardless of what's happened with the Steelers so far this year, what talent they possess. Going on the road and beating a team like that, that's going to be the next challenge for this defense to prove itself if it truly wants to be great. They've touched greatness plenty. They had 3 shutouts last year. We understand that. But understanding the competition level and the fact that even though they had some injuries last year, they did face some backup quarterbacks and some rookie quarterbacks, and they were fortunate in that regard. I'm guessing that's not going to repeat itself to the same degree this year, so the defense still has plenty to prove, but I think overall you give them a thumbs up, more good than bad so far, 3 weeks into this thing.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. All of our ongoing intelligent conversations here at WNST.net brought to you by Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Make sure you're checking out the ROFO Rewards card. You can also download that to your phone and on your app, and then when you pump your gas, you get your points. You get your fried chicken, your Western fries, and that $1 coffee at ROFO free of charge. Real fresh, real fast. It is Royal Farms. Also brought to you by the Modell Lyric. Make sure you're checking out the website there. That John Cusack Say Anything has been moved to next month. That's going to be awesome. We got Steely Dan coming in a couple weeks. John Mayer doing a big benefit there for the Kimmel Cancer Center where my wife had her life saved twice. You can learn all about the magic at the Modell Lyric at modell-lyric.com. Also, a big interview this week I had with Tom Cunningham. You'll hear here at WNST tonight. I got Alex Collins working the Irish jig dance thing. Lord of the Dance coming to the Modell Lyric next week. So make sure you go to modell-lyric.com where there's always magic. Also, Sporticulture. I got beautiful flowers here in the studio each and every week. They're all brought to you by Sporticulture. That's Sporticulture. Sporticulture.com. Court grows these flowers out in West Baltimore and ships them everywhere in the country, officially licensed NFL stuff. So whether you're a Steeler fan or a Raven fan, you can ship these flowers anywhere. Go to Sporticulture.com to learn more. Also, Charles Newsonoff & Sons since 1923. True love comes in all shapes and sizes, and there's something for everyone and everyone's budget at Charles Newsonoff & Sons. They also buy gold over there. See them in Parkville. They've been there for a long time, 695 right at Perring Parkway. You can see it from the outer loop, and you can see them at charlesnewsonoff.com. Let's grow old together. See my man Sidney over Charles Newsonoff. Luke Jones here, talking all things defense, and you mentioned the road and the road ahead. 4 out of 5 on the road. We don't do that a lot, and obviously the next couple of weeks, a lot of road cooking here. Feels like it's going to be a little while before I get back into my soaking wet PSL seats here, Luke. But first up, Pittsburgh, and you have to put these things one by one, an improved version of Cleveland, and then, of course, they better not lose on my 50th birthday out in Nashville. But this is a rough little stretch here and a treacherous little stretch. I am heartened that they're 2-1 going into this part of it because they're going to need that in their pocket.
Yeah, I think if you've gone into the season, though, if the Ravens were any worse than 2-1, then you're starting to say, well, this team's probably just not very good.
Fair enough.
You played two of 3 at home to start the year. Buffalo at Cincinnati, Denver. They better be 2-1. So I don't know if that makes me more encouraged. I think it just means that they're kind of where they're supposed to be.
They're on track, is what I would say, right?
Yeah, I think if you want to be realistic about this stretch, or maybe a little more pessimistic, just looking at how difficult this stretch looks on paper anyway, you'd like to be 3-0. Seriously. Let's face it. Who have the Ravens beaten on the road over the last 4 to 5 years as far as accomplished quarterbacks that they've faced when they're playing away from home? It's a pretty short list. Go back to, they beat Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh for the 2014 postseason. Since then, the list of quarterbacks that they've beaten on the road it's not much. I'll put it that way. And one of the ones they had beaten on the road since then, Andy Dalton, they've already lost to this year. So, they're 2-1. That's fine. I'm not trying to belittle that, but when you look at 4 of the next 5, at Pittsburgh, at Cleveland, which we mentioned, Baker Mayfield mania, we'll see how that all goes, at Tennessee, which, is an interesting situation there. Mariota's not healthy. Who knows where he's going to be at that point in time.
That was a nice win for them, by the way, Sunday.
Yeah, no question. I mean, impressive defensive work for them. Dean Pease with the Titans defense doing a nice job in that one. And then home against New Orleans, Drew Brees. So even coming home, that's not going to be a walk in the park by any stretch. And then they go to Carolina, which the Panthers, they're one of those Jekyll and Hyde teams. They can look really, really good and other times look not so good. But, I mean, you can sit here and say you can make a very plausible argument for the Ravens to lose any of those 5 games, I think. I mean, even Cleveland, who actually looks like they might kind of sort of have a quarterback at this point, and we'll see. It's a long way to go.
Well, it feels like the easy games are over. Buffalo and Denver at home, they were the better team. They played at home. They held serve. They went out to Cincinnati. They fell behind. They got back up and walked straight. I mean, that's the one thing, the resiliency of the group over the last 3 weeks. Buffalo, no adversity, but the last 2 weeks, there have been things that have gone wrong, especially in the special teams, where they got a lot of homework to do. If they go getting punts blocked in Pittsburgh, they're going to lose on Sunday night.
Yeah, and as much as we've talked about the confusion about the blocked field goal, I still don't see how that's legal based on what the rule that was made off of the Shea McClellan block in Foxborough against the Ravens 2 years ago. But even if you want to concede the referees blew that one, the blocked punt, you can't have that. I mean, when you look at a big-time special teams play, whether it's a blocked punt, a return for a touchdown, something along those lines, I mean, that basically equates to a turnover. I mean, it may not look that way officially in the stats column when something like that happens, but that is such a big play, and it really has a big impact on win probability and who's more likely to win. I mean, those types of plays, which, to the Ravens' credit, they've often been on the good side of over the last, really over John Harbaugh's tenure with Jerry Rosburg running the special teams, but that's something you have to clean up, and especially playing on the road. You go on the road and you're facing a formidable opponent and you get a punt blocked or you give up a return or something like that, you're asking to be beat in that scenario. So they clearly need to clean things up. Tim White took over as the returner, replacing Janarian Grant, who was waived over the weekend. He did okay. Certainly nothing that stood out as being overly great, but he didn't put the ball on the turf, and that was an improvement over what we saw from Grant in weeks 1 and 2. But that's still something that's yet to be determined as far as the return game. But, yeah, there's plenty for as accomplished as this special teams unit is and typically ranks somewhere in the top 5 and the different rankings that are out there and everything. They have some work to do. They have some cleaning up to do, and it's pretty clear. I don't think anyone would be surprised. Jerry Rosburg not too happy with how that one went. And like I said, even when you want to throw the bizarre field goal block in the mix, and even if the referees did blow that one, you still can't forgive the punt block, and that's something that's uncharacteristic of Ravens special teams.
Baltimore Luke is the way to find Luke. He is Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at the Lee Tessier team. That's Baltimore's premier realty team and the people I trust with my real estate transactions. Support them the way they've supported the community over 50 years of experience helping local buyers and sellers just like you, locating the finest properties and negotiating the best deals. That's what they do. Go to LeeTessier.com to learn more about that. Also, later on this week, Billy Cole is going to be joining us here from Cole Roofing. We're going to be talking about the Ravens and the Terps and the trip to Pittsburgh and what's going to become of Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette and the Orioles. But we also do the community and charity series here each and every Thursday. If you've got a great story to tell, like the John W. Brick Foundation, or the Flip Flop Festivus, or the Fashion Rocks Autism event this week, or our dear friends at Maritime Magic and Living Classrooms Foundation, if you got a story, you got a charity, you need it told, email me, nasty@WNST.net. All of that brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing and Pfister Energy. Billy Cole will be here a little later on in the week. And by the way, for any of you that got all caught up in the Tiger Woods thing and the sunshine on Sunday while I was sitting in the rain watching football, I know the Tiger Woods thing is there. I'm going to talk to our dear friend later on in the week from Compass Point here. Robert Kennedy will be joining us. A little basketball, a little golf. But if you want to go hit the little white dimple ball when the sun comes out, make sure you get down to Pasadena. Compass Point with some fall golf, the Craft Beer Open, and night golf coming up for Halloween weekend. Learn more at compasspointgolf.com. And Robert Kennedy will be here to talk all Tiger. The Tiger Woods thing escaped me, Luke. I was so busy with football. Who the hell was watching golf on Sunday, right? Except on your Twitter.
You know what? More people than you think, because and look, I'm not a big golf guy. You know that. I've never pretended to be someone that.
It's not golf. It's Tiger Woods.
Exactly, but that's the whole point. Love him or hate him, he is. I mean, we always hear the term, moving the meter
right.
in golf or in any sport. He's the epitome of that. I mean, there are so many people like me who don't pay attention whatsoever, other than I'll flip on the final day of the Masters if I have nothing else going on, or the U.S. Open, the British, whatever. But Tiger playing and being in contention and winning in this day and age, I mean, that is such a boom. I mean, that is such a huge development for golf that, people can talk all they want about, there's plenty of other talented golfers and, people should be paying attention otherwise. But that's not reality. I mean, he is so different than everyone else that him winning, and I wasn't watching it on Sunday because I was in the press box and working and focused on football, but I was definitely keeping one eye on my Twitter feed just to see how he was doing, and it's fascinating. I mean, when you consider what he's been through physically, I mean, say what you want about Tiger Woods, the man, or mistakes he's made, but what he's been through physically with the back to just be in this position again, that's pretty remarkable. And I'll say this, the PGA Tour and anyone invested in golf from a financial standpoint, television, all that, they're really excited to see him win, because that's just going to make 2019 that much more enticing from a rating standpoint, with Tiger finishing off, the end of this season on such a high note, winning a tournament.
All right, to football we go here, and Pittsburgh week and special teams. Let's we can break all of this down, but you can't have kicks blocked, and certainly the rules part of this. But very unusual to see the special teams be something we're talking about on a Monday in a negative way that led the points the other direction. Whether the rules were broken or not, it is a little strange. And obviously on a day when Tucker hit big field goals as well, that's the thing that sort of packs every week, that we feel like special teams, if there's an intangible part of the game, we're going to win that battle. We're going to have 3 more points than you because of our kicker, right?
Yeah, and that's where, and I made this point in one of our other conversations, but I think that's where you have to be a little, I mean, there's 2 ways of looking at that. Yes, it's concerning, but when you consider what's characteristic of a Ravens team, and the offense we've talked about for years, not performing to a level you'd like to see. That's no secret.
Well, when you're kicking 52-yard field goals, just in general, right, it means the offense didn't get too far.
Sure, yeah, and that's a fair point, even though, I mean, certainly on Sunday I wouldn't be critical of the offense, but I think you can look at this one of 2 ways. You can be concerned about it and say, oh, my goodness, I mean, what's wrong with the special teams? Or you can say, well, they had some hiccups. There are things that I feel pretty confident that Jerry Rosberg will correct, understanding the track record that's here with that unit specifically. And you say, well, they had those lapses, and they still won by 13 points. And look, I just was talking a few minutes ago about how Denver, in my mind, a little bit of a paper tiger when you look at them as a 2-0 team. Both games were at home, both narrow wins, didn't exactly come against the best teams in the NFL, at least that we think. But I think the fact that they were able to win by 2 possessions, even with some of those special teams lapses, I mean, that to me, that's encouraging. That means that there's room for improvement still, and you won by 2 touchdowns or by 13 points. So I'll look at that aspect from that perspective. So I think as they need to correct it. There's no doubt about that. And the return situation is still very murky, but that's been that way since Jacoby Jones, his penultimate year, his last year.
I never feel like that's a huge part of the team. Getting to know the Tim Whites or the Janarian Grants before they're even gone. It doesn't feel like it's a big part of the game till you bust one, right? But there's a lot less of that going on in football, just in general across the game, and the way the kickoffs are now, and the way the punt game can be directed in certain ways if you got a good enough punter, and if you have coverage. But I don't focus on it, although I know it's what John did. It's what Rosberg does. It's a game changer when you get something blocked. But I don't feel like week after week we're back in the days of Jermaine Lewis where he's going to get under kicks and can take it to the house or Devin Hester. I think the game has changed in that way, and it's been minimized in such a way that I don't pay enough attention to it probably, right?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, we're still dealing in small sample size territory. But with the changes made to the kickoff where you can't get the running start anymore, you kind of have the no-fly zone the first 15 yards as far as the receiving team engaging in blocks with the kickoff team, it's kind of led to a scenario that's a little more conducive to having a few more returns. But I think in turn, and it'll be interesting to see what the data looks like over the next 6 weeks, let's say, even though the way it's set up, it seems like it's a little more conducive for returns, I think you might see teams respond to that in a way where they just try to boot the ball through the end zone more so. So how that plays out.
Well, that's what I would do every time if I had a kicker, right? I would never want them to return the ball ever. Kick it through. Let's bring our defense onto the field because that's one more play where they can't score a touchdown and we can't have something screw up to cost us the game, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the flip side argument to that is if you're really good at covering kicks, you don't want to just concede the 25-yard line every time. So, but I think if we end up seeing more returns and more return yardage, and there was some early evidence supporting that, I think you're going to see teams more go the route of kicking the ball into the end zone. And I'll say this though, your overall point, I mean, the return game is not near the factor that, at least it doesn't feel like it's near the factor that it used to be. And
well, special teams is a bigger factor, though. I mean, in general, the extra point thing unto itself is just a ginormous factor. So they've tinkered with all of this, with kickers and punters and field goals and rules, which even more astonishing that a guy leaped over the line and blocked a kick and nobody said anything about it other than our sideline. But all parts of this have really tinkered with the game. I mean, I kind of remember when the two-point conversion came along and they didn't have that in the pros, and it creates more coaches' decisions, right, than anything else. But more than that, it also creates performance for your special teams on a windy, wet day that you got to make 35-yard field goals just to get a point. That has been across the league, and obviously last weekend it was a big story, but as the weather starts to go foul later in the year, it'll be a bigger story as well. Special teams are a big part of the game, but the return part, to me, it doesn't feel like I've got to have Devin Hester to win in a way where I really felt like that was a factor. You got to have the kicker, right? The kicker and the punter, and to some degree, Morgan Cox did not have a great day Sunday either. Snapping the ball is also something. We never know that guy's name till the ball's high, right?
Oh, there's no question about that. I mean, it's certainly important, and I think your point is well taken in that you probably don't need to have an elite returner. But at the same time, you look at the history of the Ravens, they've kind of needed to have an elite returner. I mean, you think 2000, I mean, they didn't have a great offense, certainly didn't have a great passing game. They had a strong running game, but Jermaine Lewis was an X factor for them and gave them a little extra something that their offense couldn't give them necessarily. And same with 2012. I mean, Jacoby Jones, I mean, look at some of the games that he won for them. Beyond the Mile High Miracle as a receiver, but returns a kickoff in the Super Bowl, had a big kickoff in that Dallas game in the regular season. So, when you have deficiencies on either side of the ball, special teams can make up some of the margin for error there, and the Ravens have been really, really good at that. They haven't been so good in the return game the last few years, at least in having that traditional guy. I mean, last year, they had some returns for some touchdowns. I mean, Chris Moore, Michael Campanaro actually did a respectable job, but they haven't had that standout return guy since Jacoby Jones. And will they have that guy at some point? Maybe. I'm sure someone will come along. But to your point, it's very clear, especially the kickoff. Now, the punt return, that's still something that can be a difference maker, depending on what kind of coverage units, what kind of punter you're talking about. Punt returns, that can still be an explosive, big play. Kickoffs, it's very clear where the league is heading with this. I think if there's anything, as much as we've talked about some of the rules with quarterbacks and roughing the passer, and Clay Matthews was popped for another one on Sunday that was controversial, and people complaining about that. If there's one thing that I'm pretty confident is going to go away completely at some point in the next 5 to 10 years, I feel like it's going to be kickoffs. And maybe this rule, maybe I'm wrong, maybe this rule really does cut down on the number of concussions, but kickoffs specifically have just been considered such a dangerous play, probably why it was so exciting, quite frankly. But that's something that the league has very clearly tried to marginalize, and I think the league has been effective doing that. We'll see how the new rules, the new mechanisms in place impact that, but it does feel like something where you can get by with having just okay return men if, and this is the big if, and this is why Janarian Grant was waived over the weekend, if you can protect the football. That's first and foremost. I mean, I don't care how great you can be returning the ball. If you're putting it on the ground every week, you're setting your team up to lose. I mean, those are, as I mentioned, those special teams turnovers or blocked kicks, those types of plays. I mean, those really tend to flip the win probability and put you at a disadvantage trying to win a football game.
He is Baltimore Luke on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. He'll be in Owings Mills for all things Pittsburgh week. We're also going to be doing a little Oriole residue during the week here as well. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. You can listen live when you want, where you want. No static at all, just like our friends at Steely Dan coming into the Model Lyric next month. It's the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Big thanks to them for their sponsorship for many, many years. Our morning newspaper delivers digitally to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Don't forget about the John W. Brick Foundation 5K run coming up on October the 14th at Timonium. You go to Brick Bodies and learn more about that, and JWB5K.com. Our morning newspaper also brought to you by the Maryland Jockey Club, where they're getting ready for Turf Cup out there, as well as the Maryland Million coming up on October the 20th. Had a nice DeFrancis Dash over the weekend. You can learn more on the front of WNST.net under the Laurel tab. And make sure you get down and check out the beautiful sports bar that they have put together down. If you haven't been to Laurel in a while, you got to get down to Laurel Park. Also on the front of WNST.net. Every Thursday, Dennis Kolatzis is here driving you home from 3 until 5 with the SSV on WNST, getting you ready for Pittsburgh week, and also sponsoring our WNST tech service. It is our breaking news service. It's the best thing we do. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We're going to Pittsburgh this week, and you can email me anytime. Nasty at WNST.net. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net, AM 1570, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.